When installing a door, make sure to use your PPE with safety glasses and earmuffs. And starting on the left here, we have a Phillips #2, Robertson #2, 1/4 inch driver, 3/8 inch driver, 3/8 adapter for sockets. Then we have a 10 mil socket, 7/16 socket, 1/2 inch socket, 9/16 socket, 17 mil wrench, or a crescent wrench would work fine. 2 pipe wrenches is preferable. If you have just one, that's okay. Wire strippers, tape measure, grinder, drill with a 3/16 bit on it, an impact, level, pencil, Sharpie, and a knife. All right, for the larger tools, we have our material lift, which you can rent at a nearby Home Depot or rental store. We also have a small 6-foot ladder, and we also have a 4-foot ladder and a piece of plywood for the lift. So in here first there's the owner's manuals. Put those off to the side. Unbox this guy. First we'll start by taking the U-bolt out. Be easier to put the door up later. This cardboard is garbage. Okay, start by unwrapping the photo eyes. The photo eyes come all pre-wired in the Dominator. Super handy. The wall button. We'll need to pull this tab out here for the battery. Pop it open. Pull the tab, put it back on. Remotes. There's a weight bar here for smaller doors. The goodie bag. So this guy we won't need, it's garbage. These Moretz we'll need for later. These guys are visor clips for the remotes. These here go into the drum. This actually holds the spoke of the drum and drives the door. Very important that these go on. That's where we'll use our 10 mil socket. Perfect. We'll switch out to 7/16 for the photo eyes. These are the photo eye brackets. And 2 parts for adjustable lengths. So this guy goes over the top. There's a carriage bolt. Goes through the back. The other carriage bolt, same place. And these guys, lock nuts, 7/16. I normally start by tightening them down just right at the edge of this circle here. And then you'll see a wing nut, and kind of a round concave or convex washer. This goes on the back. And the wing nut on top. Perfect. We'll do the next one and then we're good to go. Now your motor's ready for the next step. We'll just put it off to the side till we put the door up. All right, so with every pickup or shipping, you're gonna get a parts bag. So we're just gonna go through that here and kind of explain what everything is for. So first off, this is the anti-coning collar. This is gonna go on the axle and just slide on the end and stop the door from shifting left and right. And this here is the saddle, cast iron saddle. The axle will sit on top of here and then on top of the bracket. So along with that is the U-bolt, and this will sit on top. For the U-bolt, there's two 9/16 nuts that I'm just going to assemble right away here with two washers. Put those off to the side. Next you'll see here is two stoppers. These are going to go on either end and stop the door from rolling up past the other stopper. To fasten those, we use a short carriage bolt with a 1/2-inch nut. So I'll assemble that as well. Next, we're going to have the 9/16 head 3.5-inch leg. This is for mounting the brackets. You're also going to use 6 washers, large washers, to mount those. You'll find these self-tappers with a 3/8 head. These are the security screws. They're going to go on either end, pinning the last point of contact to the drum. Then you'll find some small 1/4-inch self-tappers. These are for attaching the top brush. We'll put those aside for now. And then you'll find some number 8 Robertson ones. These are for attaching the Duraseal. Last, just have some wood screws in here. This is for attaching the wire, just in case you don't have your garage already pre-wired. And that's it for the parts bag. So we're going to butt in. Going to measure all the way across. Here I have 145, so I'm going to write that down. Now I'm going to check on the door. You'll find a tag that's just right here on the drum on one side. So now on my tag here, you'll notice my name, the order number. What you're looking for is the width. So here I have 149. You'll notice that's 4 inches larger than the opening. That's because the door has to overlap 2 inches on the side for our guides to hold the door. The other thing to check while you're down here after you've pulled off your tag is the height clearance that you'll need. So I always measure from the bottom of the axle to this top here. So you'll notice I have 10 inches of curtain, drum, and door. So I'll need to be at least 10 inches clear of the ceiling. I always give myself an extra inch to work with just in case, to make sure I don't scratch against the header or the ceiling. Alright, so now moving on to mounting the brackets. The first thing that I like to do is mark out my curtain line. So since we measured the door and determined it's overlapping 2 inches, I'm going to make a line here at 2 inches. That's going to be where the edge of the door sits. Now, since this is the motor side, I'm going to give it an extra 1.75 inches because that's the clearance that the motor needs from the edge of the curtain line to sit on top of the bracket. So total measurement here, we're going to have 3 3/4. Now off of that line, I'll just make a level line up that I can work off of there. Now this line and then away. For the height of the bracket, what I like to do is find the ceiling where I'm going to be working. And now I'll measure off of here. And like I said before, I like to leave an inch of clearance, so I'll go 11 inches from the lowest point of contact on the ceiling. what you'll notice is now I'm here 11 inches. Now I'll measure up from my opening where I have 1 1/8 inches. So I'll measure inch and 1/8 up, then I'll level across. Now I have the location of the bracket. One thing I will point out is that you can always go a little bit further away. By a little bit I mean 1/2 inch or 1 inch if it means that you're going to catch a stud, or if you end up with a butt up to plywood. You can move it out to give yourself a little bit extra clearance. There's a little bit of play in the motor for that. So now I'm just going to mark my holes here. And then I will pre-drill them. Then I'll mount them with the 9/16 head. You'll need a 9/16 socket on an impact. I'll just hold it in the exact location of the hold. And that's that. I always do a bit of a hang test to make sure I got good backing. And we're going to repeat the exact same process on the other side. Even though it doesn't have the motor on that side, I still always give the same clearance. So you're going to lay it out exactly the same. And the last step that I have to do now is I'm just going to put a screw in for the wire. Since I didn't pre-wire, the motors have wiring with them. So since I didn't pre-wire in my own shop, I'm going to just put this wire up top. And now I have something to wrap my wire to and hang it across. Okay, before we go any further, I'm just going to hang the wire across. So, I'm going to take this guy here. I'm just going to have the photo eye just hitting the ground, not too much extra. I'm just going to wrap the wire around this screw. Just a little bit of play in there so we can mount it at whatever height. You'll notice that it's hanging a little bit into the opening. That is on purpose because after this will slide in behind the guides and then it'll be tucked hidden out of sight. So now I'm just going to go across and leaving the motor on the motor side. Just wrap it around and then we're ready to put the door up. So now we're going to put the coning collar on. This collar goes on the non-motor side. So you'll see on your door which direction the sheet's coming off the roll. So this wheel is going to be on this side. So this is the non-motor side. All I'm going to do is slip it on the axle here. Now we want to find the natural resting position of the springs. So all I'm going to do that is just give it a little 3/4 turn and let it go. Now it's in its natural resting position. This is where it's going to sit, most centered without shifting to the left or right. Now this guy we're just going to bring tight up against the drum and then tighten it down into place. This is a 17 mil socket or a 17 mil wrench. Just tighten it down until it's clamped. Now we're good to go. One thing to note is when you're lifting the door, for this site we're using a material lift. You can rent these anywhere at Home Depot or a rental store near you. It does have forks, so if you're using like a forklift or a tractor that has forks as well, what you're going to want to do is, you can see here we've put a piece of plywood with a little bit of foam on there. That's just going to even out the load so that you don't end up with two dents right at your fork location. And then before we lift, the last thing we're going to do is just slide the motor on the axle. You should have enough wire here to reach, and it'll just slide over the axle. I always pull it into manual mode too so I can move the drum around. And then you're just going to pick one of the forks of the drum and it's just going to slide in over that. Alright, now that we have the door up, I'm just going to slide the saddle and the U-bolt on. The motor came with one in the package, so that's, you'll see the black saddle and black U-bolt. So this guy just slides up here between the motor and the axle, and the U-bolt is going to slide over top of that and drop down into one of these slots. Okay, and then we're just going to secure the U-bolt with the nuts and a washer. These can stay finger tight for now. We're going to tighten them up once we add the tension. The other thing to note is the slot location. So since this is a 9 high, I have it in the back slot, which we're calling number 3, and the middle slot, which is number 2, all the way pressed forward. You'll be able to refer to the install manual and see that as well. All right, now that we have the U-bolts and saddles on, now's the time to check the location of the door in the opening. And so what we want to do is make sure that we're on our curtain line with the edge of the door. So here, I'll always check. I could come a little bit this way with the door. So while the lift is up still, I can just shift the door a little bit on the brackets, and now I'm where I want to be. It'll be even on both sides. All right, now that we have the door in the saddles and the U-bolts are on, what I always like to do is check the curtain line that we made before, that the edge of the door lands on that curtain. So in this case, I have to shift the door a little bit. It's really easy to do with the lift up still. So you can just kind of shift it on the brackets until you're lined up with your line. And I'm happy there. So that's all. So now we're going to move on to tensioning the door. The first thing we're going to do is lock the motor in place. So you can hear now that it's locked, you won't be able to move it much. I always lock it with the bottom rail up so that when I cut the plastic, I have easy access to this. Now, pipe wrenches around the axle here, and make sure you're ready with your impact. If you're on the motor side, it's a 1/2 inch socket. On the non-motor side, you can tension from there as well, and it's a 9/16. And so what I'll do is I'm going to make a line on the axle so that I have something to count, and then I'm going to turn downward towards myself. I'm going to count it out. 1, and that's 2, and then at 2 I'll kind of check, and this feels like good tension to me, so I'm just going to hold this here and tighten my U-bolt. Now make sure that it's holding. I always leave a pipe wrench up here just in case, that if it lets go, it's not going to let go and it will just stop up against here. Now before cutting the plastic, I'm going to go to the other side and tighten that U-bolt. Alright, so now we're going to cut the plastic just using our knife. I'm going to start on the non-motor side. You'll notice on this aluminum rail there's little ribs that you can cut along without scratching. You don't want to cut where the curtain of the door is, otherwise you'll put a big scratch in there. So I always cut along the bottom rail and then just work my way across. And then when I get to the end here, I always try to keep a hand on the door so that it doesn't slam down. And then I just let it down like that. So now we're going to unroll the door and then roll it back up, just to, before we put the guides on, to make sure it's rolling up nice and straight. One thing you're going to want to make sure is that your header is nice and clean. There's no staples or screws on there. Otherwise you'll scratch it on the face of the door. So we're going to pull the plastic off around the back. And then I'm going to pull the rope, and I can release the door while having my hand on it and roll it down. And I'll lock it again. And just pull the plastic off. All right, now that the plastic's off, we're just going to roll it down. I'm keeping it away from the face just to keep it off. Now I can roll it up. nice and straight. And I'll normally stop it just a little bit into the opening so that when I slide the guides on, I have a piece there to work with. All right, now we're gonna measure the guides. So we're gonna go right down to the ground, and then we can measure up to the bottom of the roll here. We'll see we're just about at 110. We'll call it 109 3/4. And then I'll just check my bracket here. I always cut on a 9 high. I'm going to cut right at the bottom of the bracket here. So 108 3/4. And that should give me clearance of my fascia, which is 107 1/2. So just to clear that up, you never want to be higher than this point of contact, and you never want to be lower than your opening height. So in between those two, I always measure on the bracket. I have 109. So that's what I'll cut the guides at. When you measure out the guides, it's important that we start measuring off this bottom tab, not the top. And I'm just going to lay them out. And 109. And then we'll just grind that. And then now that the guides are cut, we just have to bend this tab back. We're going to bend it about 30 degrees. And then the other thing to check is that the inside here is clean and doesn't have any slag. You can kind of knock that off with whatever you got. And these guides are ready to go up. All right, so now for placing the guides, I like to give about a 1/4 inch gap between the edge of the wheel and the outside edge of the guide. I can check that with my pinky. And then I'll put in the first 7/16 little lag bolt. Right at the middle of the slot so you have some adjustment. Then it's going to level down. So level there. Now I'll just set the bottom in place. And then once we have both guides on and everything's running nice and straight, then I'll fill the rest of the holes. Same thing, 1/4 inch gap. And just level down. Okay, now the guides are on. I'm just going to put my hand on the door and release the motor. I'm just going to try it down to make sure it's all running nice and straight, which it is. Now I'll bring it to the middle. Always lock the door if you're going to be moving away. Now I'm going to put the stoppers on. So this guy just goes here on the rail. Carriage bolt through the back. And then the nut on the carriage bolt. That's going to be a 1/2 inch. We'll do the same for the other side. Okay, and what you'll see is that these guys will contact the top of the guide and stop the door. So that's the purpose of putting those on. Up next, we're going to mount the photo eyes. So you can mount them up whichever height you like. I normally go 10 inches. Just make sure they're the same for the left and right. To mount these, I'm using the 1/4 inch self-tappers that are in your parts bag. I'm just going directly onto the guide. But if you wanted to space these out further, you can absolutely use wood screws or whatever you want to mount them. Okay, so we're just going to tuck the wires here with some sticky foam that we got. Just going to tuck it in behind so they're out of the way and hidden. So we're just going to moret these wires to get rid of this big mess here. Comes with 2 morets. Black on black, white on white. Let's give these a good twist. You don't want to pull them out. All right, so now we're going to mark the top brush. So you're going to want to make sure the door is completely down. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make a mark just inside, up above the header. And it's really important that you're up above because you don't want to be too low with the brush, otherwise you'll start seeing the brush hanging into the opening and it will be unsightly. So now that I have the mark in here, I'll go inside and attach that brush. All right, so now that we're inside, we're just going to unlock the door. And I'm going to roll it until I see my mark, which is right here. You can see the marks that I've left. So now I'm going to lock it in place, and now I'm going to attach the brush over top of that mark. All right, and the last step of top brush is you'll see that you can slide it left or right. So once it's in place, we just want to pinch the aluminum retainer just to stop the brush from sliding out. So just pinch, make sure that doesn't slide, and we're going to pinch both sides, and then we're good to go. All right, moving on to the Duraseal. So we're just going to bring it up to the top corner here. And mostly what we want to make sure is that it's not quite, it's just barely touching the door. We don't want it pressed up hard against because that will stop the door from rolling down and cause issues down the line. So I already have these holes pre-drilled. You can space them out however you like. What I normally do is I'll count corrugations. So I'll go 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. All right, so for the security screw, you're gonna make sure the door's all the way down, and then we're just gonna put it through the sheet to the drum at a point of contact that's past the top of the roll. And I'll explain that in a second here. So I'm gonna pick the corrugation, now I'm gonna roll it back, and then I'm gonna go through the sheets right to the drum using the 3/8 self-tapper. Okay, so the reason we want it past the top is that when the door's all the way down, there's no way to lift and slough extra sheet past the last point of contact. So no one can break into your garage by lifting your door. So now it's secure, we're all good to go. All right, so now we're gonna move on to setting the limits. So I'm just gonna plug it in, make a bunch of sounds. So you can remove this cover. Now, when you set the limits, you have to start with the door halfway open. So I'm gonna bring it to the halfway point and lock it back in. You'll see here that the red light is flashing, prompting me to go down first. So you'll notice how I'm going down, but the motor is actually rolling the door up. To switch that, all I have to do is press operate. Now it switches the direction, and when I press down, the door will go down. The reason this is happening is just because you can put the motor on the left or the right, and its default setting is to be on the right. So if you're on the left, you'll have to press operate to move it. So I'll set the bottom limit first. When I get close to the bottom, I'm just going to slow down and inch it in. Now I'm happy at my bottom limit. I'm going to press set. Now you'll notice that the green light is flashing, prompting me to set the upper limit. Same thing, I always inch into the last little bit. And I always try to stay about 1/2 of an inch down from the stoppers just so it doesn't slam up against them. Now I'm going to press set. And I'm just going to stand back because it's going to go through a learning cycle. It's got to go down, up, down again. And then it's going to set the limits. Alright, so now that that's done, the last thing left to do as far as the limits is, you'll notice this button here that says force margin. So I'm going to increase that to the maximum on this big door. This is basically telling the motor how hard it can push up against an obstruction. So I'm going to set that to the max by holding down force margin and then pressing open, which is increasing the margin. So now I'm maxed out, I can't go anymore. To take force margin off, I'll do a very similar thing. Press and hold force margin and press close. In the event of a power outage, there's a red rope on the side here, and all you have to do is pull down. You can hear the motor disengage. Now you can roll it up by hand. One thing to note, depending on the size of your door, the weight may vary, so it's either a 1 or a 2-person job. When you're happy with the location of your door, you can lock it again. Now the door is not going to move. And then when the power comes back on, just make sure that your red rope is engaged. If it's disengaged, the motor won't automatically re-engage. So I'll just display that for a second here. So right now, I have the door in manual mode. I'm going to press operate. And you're just going to hear that. All you have to do for that is pull the rope, re-engage it, and now it's good to go. All right, up next we're going to code some remotes. So to code remotes is very easy. There's a button here that says door code. We're going to have to hold it down the entire time while we're coding. And then I'm going to press the button here once and twice, and then it will be coded. And the motor's going to beep indicating that it's coded. So I'll just display that. So once, now you can hear that the motor's beeping faster. So I'm going to hit it a second time, and now it's coded. It stopped beeping. It's telling me that it's coded, so I can just try that out, and it's working. So coding the wall button is going to be exactly the same thing. We're just going to hold down door code, press the button once, twice, coded. Moving on to the keypad. If you have a keypad, when you unbox it, you'll find inside there's a factory pin. So for this case, factory pin is 3774. So to set that up, I'm going to enter in the pin. This has to be done within 15 seconds of entering the pin, so I'll show you how to do that. We're going to go 3774. Now I'm going to hold down door code and press number 1 and number 1 again. Now this keypad's coded. Number 1 is the enter button. So if I go 3774, 1, and it's coded.